because I didn't want anyone to know. Like, I was the funny.
Yeah.
You
had a
me.
reputation to uphold.
I was the funny girl who was a little bit like
life of the party.
Yeah. So no one could know that I secretly hated myself.
Yeah. Welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stauffer, and I am so excited to welcome our guest today, Kenzie Taylor. Hi, Kenzie.
Hello.
So glad to have you with us.
I'm so glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you're from, upbringing, that kind of stuff.
Okay. I'm from Cache Valley, born and raised in Providence. Had a really good seminary teacher over here.
That's right.
I have 3 little brothers, and I grew up, went to Mount Crest, was a swimmer, water polo, all that fun stuff. I left and then met my fiance, who actually, he's from West Valley, West Jordan, and he ended up moving up here because he loved it. Because if you're not from here, I'm convinced the valley's magical, and when you are born and raised here, you're like, I need to get out for a little while. So I got out, he came in, and then we got set up. So I'm back.
How long were you out?
A year, almost exactly.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
And where were you?
Harriman.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I went and lived with my parents for a year.
Your parents are in Harriman?
Yeah.
What?
You didn't know that?
Shows how much I'm following.
Oh yeah, yep. They're in good old Harriman.
Well, I ran into you at the Chinese restaurant, and I thought, oh, they're still around, that one time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you were there for a year, and when did you come back?
It was like around my birthday, 2022. So May.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I've known you since you were quite young.
Yes.
So I love you and
I love you.
Your family and your background. So I'm so excited that you're going to share with us what you've been through, just your mental health journey. Why don't we start from the very beginning of when you started noticing maybe just some symptoms about what you've been through?
It's funny because my mom brought up when I was really little, I used to do this thing where I would ask my friends, "Are you still my friend?
Yeah.
Are you still my friend?" And my mom and dad used to be like, why are you doing that? But I remember being little and being worried that like they weren't going to want to be my friends anymore. So I think that was probably the early signs of like my anxiety. And as I grew up, I remember being constantly worried about what people think of me. It's something I still struggle with. I hate it, but it's part of who I am. And I think as I got older and I reached the teenage years, I remember I would have these bouts of these panic attacks where I'd get sick. And I remember I'd just lay awake at night and just wonder, this is a funny story. I'm not trying to make light of it. But I remember right after I graduated, I had a panic attack one night, and I used to have a thing for Lil Wayne. I love Lil Wayne. Yeah. And I'm sure Zach is going to roll over when he sees that and be like, I can't believe I'm marrying this girl. But I had a poster of him on my wall. And I remember having a panic attack in the middle of the night. I ripped my poster down. And this kind of goes along with what you had talked about in your talk. Mm-hmm. I thought God was like, I can't believe you like Lil Wayne. So I tore the poster down and I put up a picture of Jesus in the middle of the night. And I got sick. And I remember thinking like, okay, I'm going to feel better. And I don't know, like I just remember things like that, and that all makes sense now. Yeah. So random.
No, that helps me so much to understand this and some of the questions I want to ask.
Oh yeah.
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 So let's talk about those first impressions. Mm-hmm. Can you remember when your mom says that you used to do that? Mm-hmm. Like how old were you?
Oh, I was young. I remember. Oh God, probably like 6 or 7. And
so do you remember, even at that young age, do you remember being a little bit concerned about
someone not wanting to be my friend?
People's devotion to you?
Yeah, just like, hey, are you my friend? And I remember asking that a little bit. I'm sure part of me tried to like bury it because it's kind of embarrassing now to think I did that. But like, oh yeah.
So you had a hard time feeling like anyone would be loyal to you.
Yeah.
Or committed to you.
Yeah, or like anyone wanted to be my friend. So.
Why?
I don't know. I think now it's because I know I'm chemically wired different. I just know that now. As much as I like like to tell myself like, okay, you know, you can get, I have anxiety, I have depression. And I think the thing that makes the most sense now is that I have OCD. And if you told my brothers that or Zach who live with me, they'd be like,
Yeah.
she does not have OCD.
Yeah.
But it's I didn't know there was a different form of OCD, and it's totally obsessive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an early sign of it. Like being obsessed with like, hey, you know, are we good?
Yeah.
I know we're good, but like something in me is like, that person's mad at you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oftentimes we think of OCD like Monk,
clean,
like Adrian Monk, like I've got to
yeah,
have everything in
yep,
order and clean and orderly. And,
yep.
but it's fixating on a thought
Then that's,
or a concept.
yeah. And it's like, I remember when they told me that, I really laughed, and then they explained it to me, and I'm like, I've been that way my whole life.
Yeah.
My whole life. So
me asking things like, hey, what led you to feel that way? It's not a narrative of lack of self-esteem.
it is a little
Is
bit.
it? Okay.
I think it's a combination because I've always struggled with my self-esteem. I got bullied when I was younger for being heavier. I grew up, and you know my brothers. I have 3 little brothers who are incredibly athletic, and they're 6 feet tall, football players, and I am 5'5", and I'm chunky, and I own that now. But growing up being a swimmer,
Mm-hmm.
I remember people making comments to me all the time, like, "Can't believe you swim so fast at your size." And I remember thinking, "Thank you, actually."
Maybe. Thank you. Yeah.
You know, like, but so I think I've always fought that too growing up. I remember when I started to get heavier, being like, okay, and I would just, it was the self-esteem thing. It still is.
It
But,
still is there.
oh yeah.
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 Well, just so you know, I had your back, and I would keep your brothers humbled on the basketball court
Thank you.
for you. So
Good. Someone
yeah,
needs to, and
that's
I'm glad
right.
it's you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's right.
The good old days.
Yeah.
They call me the vanilla gorilla.
Yes,
They still do. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, those
I
are the good
remember
days.
that. Yeah.
That's great.
Oh man.
So, so you feel like there was self-esteem issues, but also you recognize that the mental illness was just a part of it early on.
Yeah. Now. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I didn't. Then I thought it was all self-esteem.
And that's really important for you to recognize, is that that now you can look back and you can see it, but at the time it didn't make sense to you. You just
No.
thought it was.
I thought it was crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man. Okay.
So tell us a little more about how that impacted your teenage years.
Oh man.
Socially,
I sought
emotionally,
all of my what's the word?
validation.
Validation from people, from my peers, from boys. Because being a heavier set girl, growing up, you wanted that attention from boys and from my peers, but I just remember always thinking I was less than. And I look back at pictures of myself now and I'm like, oh, I should have owned that, you know?
Yeah.
I was so cute.
Yeah.
But like just things like that. And I dated all the wrong guys. And I knew it, you know. I always went for the badder boys. And I wish I could go back and focus on schoolwork and like my athletics. But then it was like who I was friends with, what they thought of me, what they were like saying about me, you know, just,
Yeah.
you know.
Isn't that interesting how we bounce our value off of what we assume people feel about us?
Yes. It's insane.
Seeking that acceptance and that validation through any means possible.
Oh yeah. What I would give to go back.
Yeah.
I would and I wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's part of me that's like, that sounds like hell.
Yeah.
But then there's part of me that's like, oh man, I would tell her so many things.
Yeah. So you go through those teen years, you felt like you went down roads you probably didn't want to, but you were seeking acceptance and validation. Then what happened? What's the next stage of your life, and how did that develop?
I remember not really knowing who I was, just being like, okay, I'm an adult now. And no, I really wasn't sure where to go. I remember I got diagnosed with my anxiety disorder officially when I went to college. I enrolled at USU and I started having these really severe panic attacks. And I started like, I couldn't eat. And I remember losing like 15 pounds in a couple weeks. My mom finally took me in and they had me get a psych eval. And they were like, hey, you have anxiety disorder. And I remember it was a little bit comforting, but I was like, no, now what?
Mm-hmm.
And I withdrew from school. I moved back home, and I remember I just worked full time, and I was there for like 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And those were valuable years, but I think that was where I kind of really like recognized how mentally
How severe it was.
how severe it was. Yeah. And I hid it for years.
Yeah. Why did you feel like you had to hide it?
Because I didn't want anyone to know. Like, I was the funny.
Yeah.
You
had a
me.
reputation to uphold.
I was the funny girl who was a little bit like
life of the party.
Yeah.
Yep.
So no one could know that I secretly hated myself.
Yeah.
And that I had these like thoughts of, oh man, it'd be better off not being here.
Yeah.
And I would never want to lead that on. And then I started going to therapy, and
I can speak with authority on this because being around you and seeing you as that life of the party, happy-go-lucky, just most fun girl, and so it does. If you're trying to maintain that veneer,
oh yeah,
and it was such a shock when I first heard that you were struggling with mental health because you hid it really well.
Yeah, and I wanted to. And I think that was so damaging.
Yeah.
Like, I'm glad for how it all happened. I'm so glad for how it all came to light. But I wish it could have happened sooner.
Yeah.
Because I think I could have helped more people and myself. But
do you think that we hide it because we don't trust that people will accept us that way, or?
Yeah, 100%. Because it's a taboo, I remember when growing up and hearing like, to commit suicide, it's a sin.
Yeah.
So
the worst kind of murder.
Yeah.
Right.
And I remember my age, there was a girl who did that when we were in 9th grade.
I remember.
And I think that was pivotal for me, because I remember thinking, Brother Rowe got up and gave a talk, and I'll never forget how relieved I felt when he said, like, God judges everyone differently. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that was when I started to think, okay, like, mental health is like it's health,
Yeah.
It's a form of sickness.
Yeah. If we see mental illness or suicidal ideation as weak faith or as sinful in nature, all that does is just reinforce the shame. We get into more hiding and more hiding.
Yeah.
And if we can't see it as a health issue, we don't ever call cancer survivors sinners.
No. And in fact, when I ended up in the hospital, Dr. Stillworthy, one of the things he said to me that to this day has stuck with me is, you have an illness. And he said, it's just like someone with cancer, but you can't see it. And I remember that changed my life. Because I was like, oh my gosh. So
Dr. Stillworthy was your ER doctor?
He sure was.
When you went in for an attempt or for suicidal ideation?
I had planned it all out. And I was going, trigger warning.
Yeah.
But I was going to, it was slowly, I didn't even realize it was happening. And then one morning I woke up, I thought, I'm going to kill myself today. And I was going to go up Logan Canyon in my car and make it, because I had called my insurance company to make sure that my life insurance would go to my family. But a lot of insurances won't let you if it's suicide. They won't give your family that money. So I remember I thought, I have to make it look like a car accident. Like, I have to, so that my family gets that money. And I was headed up there. I was headed up 4th North, and I had an appointment with my therapist that day. And I wasn't going to go. And what I now know is, like, the spirit was like, just go. What's the worst thing that can happen? Delay it an hour and go. And within a few minutes, I hadn't even told him I had like a plan. I had just said a few triggering things to him, and he's like, we're going to go for a walk. And I remember I was like, why? He's like, I can't let you leave. And I was like, no. And he's like, nope. He's like, we're going to go for a walk. So he admitted me into the ER. And of course it was Dr. Stillworthy, who knows my family. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I lost it.
Yeah.
So
were you relieved it was Dr. Stillworthy or embarrassed?
I was embarrassed.
Were you?
And then as soon as he opened his mouth and started talking to me, I was just overcome with peace, because I was like, okay. Yeah.
I know the night that we took our daughter in, we're sitting in the waiting room, and they have the picture of the doctor that's on call that night and they come out while we're waiting and they pull the poster out of the doctor that was there and they put in Dr. Stolworthy's picture.
Yeah.
And I felt that same
Yeah.
relief. Like, I know this man. I know he's going to care for our family. And I'm just so glad he's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't get emotional a ton anymore, but like it really, I look back and I'm like, wow.
What a turning point that was for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was your first suicidal ideation, severe moment.
Yeah. That was when I had probably my lowest personally.
Yeah.
When I was like, okay, like I was going to leave that day I left my house to not come home and I remember I couldn't even talk to my mom because I was like, she was home. She had a foot surgery. And I remember she's like, hey, see ya. And I was just like, I can't even go in there.
Yeah.
Because the only reason at that time I thought that I couldn't go through with it would have been for the people I loved. And that was what I was most concerned about.
How old were you?
28. 28 or 29. Yeah. I was 28.
So after that experience, did you get admitted to an inpatient care facility?
They wanted to. So my therapist went out and called my mom and told her. And my mom couldn't drive. So she called my brother, Nick. And he was at work with Brett McAvoy at Max Concrete. And he left to pick up my mom when they came up to the hospital. And they talked to Dr. Stoworthy and the crisis worker.
Yep.
And they said the only way we'll let her go home is if she's on for 2 weeks, 24-hour I don't know what they monitoring.
Yeah.
And they told me I was not allowed to be in my vehicle alone. I couldn't drive, which I understand now, but at the time I was like, oh my gosh.
Yep.
But
all those precautions that they take to keep you safe.
So I was at home. I'd sleep with the door open. And I remember Nick coming up. It was just this no one knew really. So it was this huge mind blown moment. And Dr. Stoworthy was great with my mom, great with Nick. And he was so good with me. He went and called my primary care doctor. I didn't know that, but then he had me come in the next day and he was just like, I remember he said to me, had that happened, I would have known. I was like, no, you wouldn't have. He's like,
yeah,
no, I would have.
How did Nick deal with all of it, your brother?
He was awesome. I think he was shocked. I think he was like, kind of like everyone else was, like, they couldn't believe it, but he was also just like, I think just really devastated a little bit that I got that low. But
you think of someone like Nick, blue collar, hardworking, physical labor kind of a guy. Was this a culture shock to him in any ways, or was mental illness something he was familiar with and accepting of?
I think he was more familiar with it. We had an uncle growing up who had bipolar pretty severely, and he passed away when we were younger. But we're pretty familiar with anxiety. My mom has anxiety, but I don't think he had any idea that it was to that point.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is a culture shock. I know for my other brothers, Oliver was on a mission.
Yeah, that's right.
So poor kid was like, my sister's losing her mind while I'm in Peru.
Jenny was on a mission when Lydia was going through it too.
And I remember not wanting him to know, but part of the deal with my therapist was everyone needs to know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we felt like, oh, how's this going to impact Jenny if we don't want her to carry this burden with her while she's got that information and that responsibility. And so did this draw, as you look back on your experience with Nick, the reason I want to pinpoint Nick is because he was in on the information at the impact point. What did that do for your relationship with Nick?
It made it very vulnerable for me, but he was really supportive. My whole family was. I think the one who took it, who didn't know how to handle it the most was my dad. Yeah. And my dad. Yeah. He's the best man ever. I think he was just like, what do I do? Yeah. Because my parents, my dad especially, I knew he'd think that, what was I doing? He'd make it about like something that he did wrong. Yeah. And I didn't want that. Yeah. But at the same time, I was like, he has to know. That's exactly what I experienced. Like, I just sat there and I processed all the ways that I'd parented my child. Yeah. And how did I mess this up? Yeah. Right? And I could see your dad Totally. And
doing that.
I remember I begged. The first thing I said, one of the first things I said when they came in is, "Don't tell Dad." They're like, he's gonna have to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And remember, our therapist said to us, like, hey, if you make this about you, then you're asking your child to manage your concern here, which is going to add to her burden.
Yeah.
And that was something I had to learn how to not.
It's true.
You want to share enough so that they know that you care, but not too much so that they don't feel like that's your responsibility.
Yeah.
Because you've got to manage.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk about what happens next. So you have that 2 weeks, you get to a more stable place.
I think it was almost harder for a little while because it was like people knew. And I went back to work, but I couldn't drive. And I went back to work on the condition that someone had to be with me always. So like the only time I was able to be alone was when I went to the bathroom. And they still stood right outside the door.
Yep.
Like I don't really talk to those girls anymore, but they during that time were very supportive. So
you can see that people in genuine care.
Yeah, and I mean it was Nick went straight there to give. They had paperwork, and he left there, took it there, and I think it just is this whole thing. Everyone knew.
Yeah. Were your bosses understanding? And...
Yeah, she was great. She kind of I think saw signs. I mean, you spend more time with those coworkers than you do your family.
Yeah.
And she was shocked, but she was like, stuff made sense a little bit.
Yeah. So you have this when you're trying to hide all of this, and then you reach a point of severity where it's now fully exposed to people that you didn't want to know, but now they know.
Yeah. Yep.
So now you get to see the real response of people. How did this change the way you saw how people view you or yourself?
It was so beautiful, but it was really scary, but it was beautiful. I remember the turning point for me was the Relief Society activity but the Sunday school. Because we kept talking in these meetings when I was in the presidency about like mental health. And I'm like sitting here, I'm like, okay, this is my era or like my area. And like, okay, I didn't know. And finally I just had this thought, like maybe my therapist will come and teach a lesson. But I thought that means everyone's going to know. I was like, nope. They just kept bugging me. I thought, what's the harm in people knowing? And I asked him, and he was great about it. He came in, and you were there. He taught. I had to share my story a little bit, and that was really scary because these are people you grew up with who you have they have no idea. They've known you since you were young. And you're like, yeah, I got there, So that for me was the most eye-opening experience of the whole thing because that was what drove me to want to shout my story from the rooftops. I'm like, this is helping people. Oh. And that's what I'm all about is like helping others. And when I watched your talk, you said that your daughter had said if it helps one person, and that's so true. Yeah. That's what I thought. So now I'm like, I will own it, and I am not afraid anymore.
That's so awesome, Kenzie, because it's full circle moment for me just sitting here because at the time when I was listening to your story back years ago, we didn't know that Lydia, our own daughter, was going to face those things.
Yeah.
And here I am hearing your story, and you were so vulnerable to share with all those people. And I think about how much I must have learned that prepared me to face what I faced that I didn't know that was around the corner with my own child.
Yeah.
So think about you're already setting that trend years ago by being willing to share that with people.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't want you guys to have to go through that. But if it makes it easier for you, that's great, Yeah. It's not like you're like, oh, I'm happy that I'm helping you, but it's like, you are. I'm glad, that you had some.
Well, think about, it's like you laid a foundation for what we're doing just right here in this podcast.
And that's so flattering just because it's funny because I'm actually I was just telling Zach the other night, I've struggled lately. I've had a bout of anxiety. And I told Zach, I was on the couch and I said, I'm supposed to go on a podcast about mental health. I was like, and I'm going insane. And he's incredible, just so everyone knows. Like, I don't know what I'd do without him.
Yeah.
But he was just like, you're still going to go on it and you're still going to do great. And I'm just like, how am I supposed to go help people when I'm like, oh, but
You're doing it.
But here I am,
Yeah.
you know, and it's always going to be a battle.
Yeah.
And I've learned that, and that's okay.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the coping skills, some of the things that you have found have helped you, from whether it's things you've learned from your therapist, therapy itself. I don't know what your medication journey is or anything like that. What would you tell people has been helpful for you?
Medication and therapy for sure. It's funny because this ties into my struggles lately. Is I'm on Prozac, and I have been on Wellbutrin for years, and for some reason, and it could be society, I've always, like, people are like, it's not good to be on meds. Like, I remember I told my doctor I want to go off my meds, and it was like a year battle, like several years battle with him, and he's like, okay, well, let's try the Wellbutrin.
You said try going off of the Wellbutrin.
Let's try that.
Yeah.
And it's been a few months now, and I've realized I need to be back on it, and that's okay.
Yeah. If it's working, it's working.
Yeah, and I remember telling one of my best friends, she struggles with anxiety and depression as well. And before she went on meds, I told her, I remember giving her this speech. I was like, it's okay to be on meds. Like, we need them. We are chemically imbalanced. Like, take the meds. And I remember I texted her yesterday. She's like, how are you doing? And I just unloaded, and she's like, it's okay to be on
there you go.
meds. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what, you're right. So I made my appointment. I go see my doctor next week, and I go see my therapist next week, and we're getting on that Wellbutrin.
You know, I've heard these different arguments about that as well, and I wonder if the principle is, hey, don't think we get on meds just to not do anything, right? So
No,
like we just take the
it's
meds
like,
and then we just sit there and let the meds do all the
yeah,
work.
it's like, you want to see me not on meds,
Right.
All y'all will want me on meds.
Yeah. But then we couple the medical treatment with therapy treatment, with acting and doing, like, being actively engaged in behaviors that are helpful.
Yeah, and you had asked me about tools. I think another big one is to reach out.
Yeah.
Zach's gotten really good at, like, how are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. He's like, okay. What's the, like, you're not fine.
He can read when you're...
Yeah, and I've learned now when he asks that, I'm just honest. I'm actually having a hard day. Well, how come? And half the time I'm like, I don't know. I just feel on edge, you know?
Yeah.
And it's same with my family, with everyone. So
that tendency to hide
still is
still there.
Yeah.
And yet you're telling people that reaching out and not hiding is key.
So I'm constantly eating my own words. But it's a good thing. I just remind myself, like, what if this were you? I'd be like, Eric, talk to me. What the heck?
Isn't it interesting that, like, it would be like a no-brainer to tell me that.
Yeah.
But it's really hard for you to believe it in yourself.
Yeah.
Because to me knowing you, it's a no-brainer for me to tell you that.
Yeah.
Because I just think, Kenzie, you're so loved.
Yeah.
Everyone I know absolutely loves you. Why would you ever? And I'm not just, trying to validate you. I sincerely, everyone I know just loves Kenzie Taylor. And yet it's so hard for you to believe that at times.
It is wild. It's like one of life's biggest mysteries.
You know, I feel so strongly, Kenzie, that that love is such a key to all of this, right? Like if we can feel authentic love, then we'll have permission to authentically love ourselves.
Yeah. It's true. But I feel like you got to want to love yourself too. Yeah. And like going to therapy that day when I wasn't going to was just that hint of, what's the harm in going to therapy one more time, you know? Mm-hmm. So
what has worked for you to give yourself permission to love yourself?
To go back on meds, you know, it's like to accept, I want to feel okay again. And I think just to allow myself to lean on people has been great. And something as simple as watching The Office. Mm-hmm. I remember the crisis worker at the hospital was like, what do you do when you feel like this? And I was bawling, and I think she thought I was being funny. I'm like, I watched The Office. And she like kind of looked at me, and I'm like, it's funny. Like, I love that show. Oh, yeah. You know? It's funny. I have like several comfort shows. It's The Office and it's Breaking Bad, which is so polar opposite. Yeah. But there's just something about like Walter White and Jesse Pinkman in a fight that makes me feel better.
The science teacher and his apprentice.
Yeah, it just is funny. And
Yeah.
but it's I don't know. So I think just when you the tools and then I did find a lot of peace in my faith. And like I think God is none of it's possible without God. And I'm a big believer in God. I'm not active right now, and I've been at, how do I say it? Like I'm at the most peace in my life as I have been.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I still believe in the principles of certain principles of the church, and that living that truth has been really good for me.
Yeah.
Because I still believe in the gospel principles.
Yeah.
It's like, do you know what I mean? Like
Totally. Do you feel like giving yourself some space spiritually has been therapeutic for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What was that your daughter has?
Yeah, scrupulosity.
Scrupulosity.
Yeah.
Totally have that.
Yeah, so like you told the story about Lil Wayne,
Yeah.
right? Where you're sitting there and you're going, I'm feeling all this shame and it's because I'm a sinful person.
Yeah.
I like this rapper.
I listen to rap.
Yeah, I listen to rap. So now I go against this and
Yeah.
I must be suffering because I'm a rebellious soul.
Yes.
And so you think to handle mental health, I remove this and I replace it with Christ, which is a great principle, right? It's a great concept.
The concept behind the logic behind
the
it.
logic behind it.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with mental illness, it's not that you were faithless.
No, not at all. It's like
or unworthy.
It's like I wasn't being anti by listening to
right.
Lil Wayne.
I mean, come on, it's Lil Wayne.
It's Lil Wayne.
Yeah.
Now I'm Post Malone.
Yeah.
So it's like,
who loves Utah?
Yeah.
So I mean,
you know what? Yes.
Do you like him going country?
I love it.
Me too. It's a good sound.
Love it.
Yeah. That's great.
So
So we've talked about you felt like therapy's been very helpful for you. Your therapist has been instrumental in your life.
Oh yeah.
Medication, reaching out. Any other tips?
I have I'm not like super into self-help books, but there are a few books that I think are good. And of course, I'd say that, and now I'm trying to remember the names of them.
Yeah.
So that's how
That's
that
okay.
works.
We can add some
Okay,
links.
You Are a Badass is really good.
Oh yeah.
And I'll tell you. I'll text you.
Yeah.
Because for some reason
we can throw them on as links.
Yeah, there's some really, really good ones.
That's great.
Like Mastering Your Mean Girl. That's a really good one.
Mastering Your Mean Girl.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. There's some that has shocked me, but I think when you find something like there's like the Happiness Lab is a good podcast that I found, and you try and uplift yourself. You just gotta. I believe in affirmations. People like make fun of people with affirmations, and I'm like, you just aren't doing it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and then your faith, you feel like you're trying to create a space where you're not increasing your shame.
Yeah.
But maintaining a relationship with God while you're at it.
Yeah. I pray every day, and me and Zach are both we both believe in God and the foundation of God. And I think letting myself have my own belief system has been instrumental in my mental health.
It makes it a more organic experience for you.
Yep.
So you can be, you're sincere, you're yourself.
Yeah. And that's just it. Like I had someone ask me the other day, they were more blunt about it, like, so are you anti now? And I remember being like offended, like,
yeah.
But then I'm like, thank you for asking me. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
At all. Like I'm not anti at all.
Yeah.
But I just have found my own.
Rather than checking boxes.
Yes. And that right there is the perfect way to put it. I feel like God believes in your heart. God's going to look at your heart, who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And he's not going to look at your temple recommend.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I love that. So Kenzie, you think about that dark day, and now you've got some hindsight after that day. Mm-hmm. What would have been missed?
So much. I think about, obviously I never would have met Zach, and he's truly the love of my life, and that never would have happened. And I wouldn't have been able to set up Nick with Kaylani, and she wouldn't have, we wouldn't have had these little twins running around. And there's a lot, like I look back and I think, oh man, I'm so glad I stayed. And it's just crazy. Like I think about my mind frame that day, and if you would have told me, hey, just wait it out, all these things are going to happen, I wouldn't have believed that. I'd have been like, But here we are, I'm planning a wedding. I have, such cute nieces and nephews and more coming, and I'm going to have kids one day. It's just like, I never would have experienced that. So it's just remembering that it really does get better. You're going to have bad days, and I'm always going to struggle.
Yeah.
I think realizing that has been something that's been key as well. Realizing that I'm going to struggle still, but there's ways around it. Just like when you get a common cold, take some NyQuil,
Yeah.
you know?
There's a reality to the illness that's a part of your life, but now you learn how to live with it and live for everything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, one thing our clinical director talks about is that when our brain is doing that, it's like the eyes of the brain get very myopic, and they can only focus on the pain and the fastest way out of the pain. And when we're that serious, that's the only way we can see it. And when our brains are so myopic, we can't see all that awaits us.
Yeah, all the things that happen after.
That we can, if we can just get through this moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true.
I'm so glad you got through that moment.
Me too. And I couldn't have done it without a bunch of people. So.
You've known about this podcast. It's been coming up, and our whole purpose is to smash the stigma by sharing our story and these stories of transformation. If you were to express what your hope is in you coming on this podcast and sharing your story with people, what do you hope it'll do?
I hope it's like what you said, it ends that stigma. I hope people just come forward. Like, it's become a bigger thing because more people are talking about it, just like this. To me, that's what everything is. What you're doing right here is exactly what needs to happen. I think making it more normal. It's okay. Like that saying, it's okay not to be okay, is so true. And I also think people need to, it's like they say you need yearly physicals. It's like, I think it's a good thing to have someone go to a therapist once a year. Just talk, you might not be mentally ill like me, but that's how people catch illnesses. It's like you go in for a mammogram, you go in for colonoscopy,
Doesn't it make so much sense to be more upstream about this?
Oh, yeah.
If so many people are seeking help when they're in the trauma scenario, if we can be a little more preemptive, a little more prepared.
Well, it's like I look back and I'm like, oh man, if I could have gone to a therapist when I was, hey, are you still my friend? Are you still my friend?
Yeah.
And it's because it's not normal. But now it's becoming more normal. So I think just being so honest, and people aren't comfortable, and that's just fine.
Yeah.
But even if you're not comfortable, go get the help. You don't have to tell everyone you're going to a therapist, but go. So.
Oh, I love that. I think you'll accomplish it by what you shared today.
Well,
thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no,
Kenzie.
this has been great.
You're wonderful. We love you, and we're so thankful you came on to share your story with us.
Yeah.
So
thank you
you.
guys.